Okay, here's a quick flyby of the battlefield. Going through, you can see roads, forests, hills, a flexible ruler, turn. You can see some Russian vehicles already set up. You see the roadway. And swing it. Oh my, that is a German tank company coming down the road. What is it that they want? Well, in Flames of War, there are two ways to win. One is to grab one of the objectives. Out there's the there's the German objective right here. And there's a second objective right here. So grabbing one of those is one way to win. Another way to win is to force your guys to retreat from the battlefield because they've taken so many casualties that they cannot stand the fighting anymore. This is what we call losing morale. And up here we have some observer guys. They're observing out that way. And they see the German tank company coming down. On the one hand here we have German assault guns. They don't have turrets. They were actually cheaper to make than tanks. These are called Stugs or Stugs, depending how you pronounce it. And over here we have the right hand side we have a standard German Mark IV and a German Tiger tank in the middle there of those three. And further on, if you look in the background, we have ourselves some half-tracks that carry infantry. And there's some more German Mark IVs over there on the other side. And facing them at the moment, what they can see are Russian T-34 tanks. This is the standard Russian tank pretty much throughout the war. But there is more than meets the eye, as there are reserves for the Russians. This is 1943. This is game number 2 of a campaign game. As the Germans are on the attack, trying to stop the Russians, trying to break through and cut off a number of Russian armies in the process, to have them surrounded. The Germans won the first battle. They went up against a entrenched Russian infantry company, and they did beat them, and now they are advancing forward for their bigger objective. This is the second line of defense for the Germans to crack. It kind of looks bad right now because you don't see many Russians on the field, but do not be misled. The Russians do have some reserves coming in. And with that, the Germans do get turn 1. And we'll pick this up turn by turn so you can get an idea of what does a Flames of War game look like. So you can see we've got roads and forests and wheat fields. And we do have some hills. And if we were looking at the ground's eye view back there, you can see there's a dice tower back there. That's what sticks out. But it just gives you an idea. And yes, we got railroad tracks on top of it. Okay, and we'll soon start with turn 1. And the end of German turn 1. You can see that the vehicles have been advancing. The half-tracks sort of spread out a little bit, and maybe because of artillery, maybe. The German tanks have moved forward, as you can see, and definitely they have fired. And believe me, the Russians have taken their hits. There's 1, 2, 3 burning Russian tanks over there on the other side. There, it's Yeah, not pretty. But it was to be expected. The Russian company does not need to take a morale check in order to stay on. Now, in Flames of War, they use another term for morale check, but that's basically what it is. They believe they call it a platoon check. But in this case here, it doesn't matter. It's still the same idea. But definitely, the Germans are coming down the roadway, and they are gunning for the Russian tanks. They want either this objective or that objective, but the bottom line is either break the Russian company, that they retreat off the field, or get the objectives. As we pan through, and we see the Russians have taken 3 tanks as casualties so far. Now the question comes down to, the Russians have some surprises. They have a few anti-tank guns, and they have a battery of mortars that could bring some pain and suffering. The Russian commander has a decision to make. Do they release the anti-tank guns in ambush, or the mortars in bombardment? Because, you know, we do have our observer dude over here. So we are at the end of Russian turn 1. The Russian commander decided to deploy the 120mm mortars in the back area over here. And they started lobbing their shells, giving this German tank platoon a nasty surprise. They lost a tank, and they bailed out another tank. Bailed out just means the tank's not capable of fighting, but it's not destroyed for game purposes. But at the same time, in that same turn, we also had the anti-tank guns. Yes, those dreaded anti-tank guns. They're there, and they delivered. Wow. They too delivered their fair share, and they ended up bailing one German tank, the one in the middle over there, and then they destroyed another German tank. So far, this is not going to be the easy fight that the German commander was expecting, because the Russians are not about to give up ground. The Russians moved one of their T-34s up. Everybody participated in this fight. And, well, we will have to see what the German commander is going to do in turn 2. Less than impressive for a German turn 2. You can see in the background over there, the Stugs are moving. They're trying to outflank those woods and then maybe, hopefully, go do an end run around the Russians. And if you look here, nothing really changed from the last Russian turn, with the exception of a bailed out marker on the middle T-34. That's it. Everybody, the German half-tracks, they're moving because they are going to move forward toward the Russian left flank. The German panzers moved a little bit. Tigers stayed in place. Everybody missed, with one exception. Everybody missed. This was an important turn. That was a whiff, a total whiff, really, for the German player. This may not bode well for the upcoming turns, but that still remains to be seen. Just when you think that the Germans had a bad turn, wow, the Russians, it was really no better. The net result was one bailed out Mark IV. That's it. Everybody else missed. It was very much the whiff. The AT guns fired on the Tiger. They hit, did not penetrate. The mortars dropped their shells on the Tiger and the Mark IV next to it over there. End result, nothing. No hits. T-34s tried. Like I said, one bailed out. That's it. One bailed out Mark IV. So, as you can see, now it is going to be German turn 3. When it's Russian turn 3, they get to roll for delayed reserves. So the Germans really need to pick it up if they want to have a chance. What a turn, German turn 3 it has been. Well, half-tracks have moved forward. They deployed their armored grenadiers, also known as panzer grenadiers, who promptly opened fire on the Russian positions. You can see that the German tanks have also moved up, including the Tiger. We got a couple of tanks up there on the hill, and they have been opening up. And one anti-tank gun has been taken out. But on the other side of the field, we also have yet the Stugs. Yes, the Stugs, the Sturmgeschütz, they have been coming in on the Russian right flank, and they took out a T-34. The Russians are fearless in terms of motivation, so when it was rolling for a platoon check to see if they were going to still stick around, they practically needed almost anything but a 1, and they rolled a 1. So the rest of the T-34s that could get out, they bailed out. So that Russian tank company is no more in existence for the game. What's left for the Russians is the one lone anti-tank gun with its commander, and we have our plucky 120mm mortar boys. Okay, turn 3 will be, Russian turn 3 is going to be pretty critical because they need reinforcements and they need them now. Well, it's the end of Russian turn 3. The only action that really happened was the Russian anti-tank gun took out the German company commander's tank, and unfortunately for the Germans, took out the company commander also. Had he survived, he could have gone into this tank. Oh well, things happen. But as you can see, things are getting hot for the Russians because the Germans are closing in on the objectives. Okay, just keep in mind the objectives, but they're also busy working on the Russian team. You also have some assault guns coming down there, barreling their way down. The only 2 units that are left on the field right now are the Russian mortar team and the lone anti-tank gunners team with its commander. The Russians did not get any reinforcements this turn. Oh well. Bottom half of German turn 4, you can see the Stugs moved forward and they opened up on the Russian mortars along with these 2 Mark IVs there. They left the Observer alone. The other Mark IV and the King Tiger, they also opened up. And, well, you can see about 3 mortar teams went down for the count. Right now, the Russian mortar team is, in fact, pinned because it's taking so many hits. If they do not become unpinned, then they can't fire next turn. We got 1 lone Mark IV there. His buddy is somewhere back there, still not willing to climb back in. In the meantime, the armored panzer grenadiers have been sitting there trying to open fire on this lone anti-tank gun, and the most they got was a pin. So at this point now, for the Russians, they need to get reinforcements now, because if they don't, it's going to look even worse. The end of Russian turn 4. They got reinforcements. Another company of T-34s came on the board, fired on the Stugs, and 1 Stug bailed out. And in the meantime, we had an AT gun swing to take a shot at the Tiger. That hasn't done any spectacular results. And, well, not a whole lot more left out here for the battlefield. So now we await German turn 5. It is now the end of German turn 6. It has been a fight. The T-34s got jumped by the Stugs and with help from their friends, but in the end only 4 hits. 6 hits, 4 bails. Over here the mortars lost another unit, but they're still hanging in there for the fight. We have a German tank that's almost on top of the objective, At the moment, they hold it. We will see what happens next turn, because it has to be at the beginning of the German player's turn. Over here, the last Russian AT gun has been taken care of, thanks to the mighty, mighty armored grenadiers for their efforts. And we will see. Will more Russian reinforcements come in next turn? We will soon know enough. End of Russian turn 6. As you can see, the reinforcements came out. These are the last reinforcements. We've got the big heavy assault guns there with 152 millimeter cannons on there, and we have our Su-122s with 122 millimeter howitzers, and they opened up on the Tiger 1 over here, failed. The heroic Russian mortars started firing on the Tiger, and they got it to bail out. We will see what happens. Over there, in the meantime, the Russian T-34 Horde has opened up on the Stugs. They bailed out one Stug. The other Stug that was bailed out originally got hit so many times, the crew, they took a morale check, and they fled the battlefield. Thus, the Stug was out of action. So at this point right now, this is getting to be a very close game. The Germans either need to break the Russians or be in sole possession of one of the two objectives at the start of their turn. Stay tuned. The end of German turn 8. It has been a slugfest. One of the SUs got destroyed by the Tiger, which remounted. Okay, and one of the Su-122s was destroyed in the process. The German Stugs, with some support of the tank up on the hill over here, opened up on these T-34s, destroying one and bailing out another. That was it. In the meantime, we had another Mark IV that came by and basically eliminated the Russian mortar platoon. They ran away. They couldn't take it anymore. The German armored grenadiers are moving up. They are advancing. We had another Mark IV that advanced. And in fact, he was responsible for taking out the 122, the Su-122, the small guy there in the center off to the right. Well, this next turn will be very, very interesting. Okay, so we come to the end of Russian turn 7, and the Russian T-34s that were bailed out, they unbailed, they got back in, and everybody stood their ground and fired on the Stugs, hitting them but not doing any damage, not even bailing them out. In the meantime, our other tanks here, our assault guns, they try to open up on the Tiger right here, and no effect. Nothing happened. So now we got some burning Russian wrecks, and the game is still not over. This will go into another turn. Well, let's see what happens. It is now the end of German turn 8. And, well, we've got some more burning wrecks on the field. The remaining big giant assault gun, the Su-152, is bailed out. The Su-122s have lost 2 of their number. They did take a platoon morale check. They still stayed in the fight. That's the fearless rating. And over here, T-34 Horde lost 1, bailed out 2, and the Stugs are still there making their stand. They lost their platoon commander, so all they can do is just stand. The Observer was on the hill previously, is now beating a hasty retreat down the hill right next to the objective. So the Russians now have a turn, and at this point, ladies and gentlemen, the Panzer Grenadiers have moved forward. So right now the Russians have to put somebody who is active near this objective right here in order to continue to contest, that the game would continue going. The end of Russian turn 8, and we have one bailed Mark IV on the hill, and well, the Stugs, they're gone. So now these guys up here are a little bit kind of worried, because now they've got a T-34 horde coming down. And the Germans are kind of fragile, because they haven't lost a single... They only lost one platoon this entire game. That was the Stugs over there. But the problem is, without a company commander who died earlier in the battle, like this guy right here, the ability for the Germans to take a company morale check, it doesn't exist. They automatically lose the game. So we are onward and forward into turn 9. So here we are at the bottom of Russian turn 9. It has been a slugfest. It absolutely has been, or I should say, no, bottom of the German turn 9. Sorry, it's kind of late. I'm kind of tired. I'd like to see how this thing plays out. You know, the thing is that the Russians ended up having multiple bailouts on the T-34 horde. They lost another tank out there on the edge back there. The last Su-152 got hit on the side, and that's pretty much all the action that the Germans got. The Russians did take a morale check for these guys, that they would stick around, and the commander said, yes, we're sticking around. For the Russian army in general, because they lost more than half of their platoons, it turns out that they, with their fearless rating, they're sticking around, continuing the fight. I believe it's the end of Russian turn 9. As you can see, the T-34 horde has moved out, and they're trying to make sure that the objective is contested, so the Germans don't win automatically in the next turn for being in sole possession. The tanks are getting close to each other, and there's a bunch of shooting, and one bail on one Mark IV. And can you believe it, at this range this guy missed? Yeah, unbelievable, isn't it? Anyways, the fight continues. Okay, German turn 9. The previous video probably mentioned it was the end of Russian turn 9. It's not. It's really the end of Russian turn 8. It has been a shooting fest. The T-34s, as you see, they moved up. The Germans fired. They penetrated some of the tanks, and we now have some T-34 wrecks out on the scene. At this point right now, the Germans are almost on the verge of winning. Almost. But you can see here that they're still fighting it out. Amazingly enough, the German tank here missed the Russian assault gun. Go imagine that. In the meanwhile, our armored infantry are moving up to support the panzers the way they can. And these two panzers still have control of the hill overlooking. They still have some few targets, but you can see a whole bunch of smoke coming out of those burning wrecks out there. Well, this is the end of Russian turn 9, and at this point the Russian tanks have moved to continue to deny the Germans control of the objective here. At this point, the Russians, their gunnery is leaving a whole lot to be desired. They have not been able to hit anything at all this turn. It's just unbelievable. Well, we'll see what happens, as now we're going to Well, here we are. It is turn 10. It is the end of the game because on the... Well, no, not the end of the game. I'm sorry. The Russians have tried to furiously counterattack, but there's a bunch of flaming T-34s all over the place. Right now, the Russians have one working T-34 on the slope there. That'd be that one. They have one bailed out. They've been surviving their morale checks. The platoon morale checks, they've been surviving. We've still got the lone Su-122 here as well, still holding on. It is going to be the Russians' turn coming up. Let's see what can happen. But looks like the Germans are in pretty good grasp of their objective. It's going to be a real tough fight for the Russians to push them off. As you can see, the armored grenadier troops are also moving forward. And, yep, this sure looks like it's going to be secured. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Russians had their last hurrah as they moved T-34s out, and they fired, and one German Mark IV went down, and a second Mark IV went down. The infantry were machine gunned at, but to no avail. And on top of that, the Russian company, they failed their company morale check. They took more than half the casualties, and they left the battlefield. The game is over as the German Panzer Company has left sole possession of the objective here. And now the Kursk campaign will move on to Battle 3 as the Germans continued their advance. Their first battle, they blew through a Guards infantry defense line. They have now just blown through a second defense line guarded by Russian tanks, and they're going to keep pushing forward. So as we generally sweep the battlefield here of the debris, the tape measure and all that, so you can see that it has not been a bloodless affair. And you can see that there's a whole lot of carnage, especially around here, as the Russians were desperately trying to protect their the objectives. But yeah, but there was a cost because the Germans lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tanks.